The right honourable gentleman makes a very good point. I think he is right, because I don't believe the Prime Minister has the intention of doing the honourable thing himself, even though that's the standard to which he held everyone else. The decision, as I said, about whether he will ultimately take responsibility for his actions is now up to Labour MPs. We heard many powerful statements from that side of the House yesterday. Labour MPs know that the Prime Minister has let the country down, he's let Parliament down, and he's also let the Labour Party down. It is clear to everyone, except the Prime Minister himself, that he has failed on his own terms. It is clear to the public that he is failing at the job. It is clear to civil servants that he is throwing them under the bus. And it is clear to members across this House that he is not fit to lead. This cannot go on. This House deserves better. The country deserves better. The Prime Minister is not fit for office. The first duty, Mr. Speaker, of any Prime Minister is to keep this country safe. This Prime Minister has put the country's national security at risk. He must take responsibility. It is time for him to go.
The question is, as on the order paper, John Trickett.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And there are many ways of developing a culture how to run the government in Number 10. I was a witness in the years from the financial crash through to the defeat of the Labour government between 2008 and 2010. And I saw a Prime Minister who would never have come to Parliament or said privately that there were some facts of which he was unaware, because he was a man of detail. He was a man of a large vision, and he's a man who drove the state forward. Now, we may disagree, and I do personally, with some of the decisions he took, but that is a different culture than the one which the two previous Prime Ministers, Truss and our friend who, with his blonde hair, used to offer a culture in Number 10 of the exotic. And we went from the exotic to the toxic. And the fact of the matter is, I did not hear members on the opposite side asking questions about the culture of those two Prime Ministers that are here today in great numbers. They contributed to the mess which this country...
Mr Turner, the man is speaking. You just walked right in front. Sorry, John Trickett.
Mr. Speaker. So those two Prime Ministers in particular, the chaotic and the exotic, left this country in a disastrous situation. But I do think that a Prime Minister who comes to the House and relies, or implies that he relies on a culture of simply process is mistaken. I think the Gordon Brown model, flawed as it was, will be far better than the one which we've heard of from the Prime Minister. I'm sorry to say that, because I want to support a Labour government that's effective. But that is the case. I saw it with my own eyes. I saw the vetting, I saw the decisions, I saw the pressure, I saw the tumult, and I saw a Prime Minister struggling with a party to deliver a different kind of society, a different kind of economy. Now, let me just turn to the present events. What did we learn from Sir Olly today? I think there are four things which matter. First, that the Security Department had tended to be wanting to refuse the vetting of Mandelson when Sir Olly first arrived, although others had said we don't need a vetting of any kind. And then, whilst the vetting process was going on, the government proceeded with or appeared to proceed with the appointment of Mandelson. And even the King and the United States administration were told that he would be the ambassador. The British state then conspired to deliver a positive vetting because that is what they believed the government wanted. And that was expressed in repeated phone calls from the private office in Number 10, which I was very familiar with in those years, to Sir Olly's private office. The pressure, according to the witness we saw this morning, who looked credible, made a very serious case that he was under pressure to proceed. And no, I'm going to make progress. There are many people standing on all sides, and it may well be pleased with some of the things I'm going to say, because I'm going to develop an argument and I want to proceed with it. The question which I haven't heard answered is, why was it that a group of people in Number 10, and possibly the Prime Minister as well, felt that that level of pressure should be placed on the Foreign Office in favour of appointing Mandelson? And I think there are two possible answers, but let me focus on one. I think that the political unit in number 10, and possibly the Prime Minister too, wanted Mandelson because he was their close political ally and because he was plugged into a vast international network of what we might call the billionaire class. The truth is that much of the nexus of wealth which Mandelson was plugging into, but so was the President, by the way, was centred around Epstein. And let me just pause in my narrative for a second. None of this debate, none of these facts would emerge were it not for the courage and bravery and resistance of the women who had been treated so appallingly on Epstein Island. But getting Mandelson into Washington as part of that network was the highest priority. A political network of highly reimbursed billionaires, frankly. All of this leaves a bad taste. The government had promised change to the people, but the change which they saw in the end was further to accelerate the integration of the British state and government into the networks of the richest people. But people in our country, certainly in my constituency, didn't vote for that. They wanted a change for their ordinary lives, a better NHS, cost of living improvements and so on and so forth. Well, we've got a long way to go to deliver that, but we did deliver a disaster with the appointment of Mandelson. I've raised the question of unemployment 4 times in recent months. Growing unemployment in our area. It's hard to see how the time which was spent by the government ingratiating ourselves to Washington would really help the unemployed and the poor. And just think about Mandelson's business involvement with Russia and China. So obnoxious is China supposed to be? I think I'm right in saying that this building has spanned all Chinese-based networks, as though these are the agencies of an enemy state. How could it be that Mandelson's links were seen to be of such a low risk? And when it comes to Russia, this House has spent literally hours discussing the appalling behaviour of Putin and Russia in relation to the east of Europe. All of these should have counted against Mandelson, but they were weighed in the balance and they counted less than the opportunity which Mandelson presumably offered as his access to a network of people which included the President. So let me I want to be very quick. I've made a case. I'm going to just make one final point. Mandelson had played a key role in a faction which sought to change the strategic direction of our party, the Labour Party, and of the government. The truth is, they wanted to change the Labour Party into something it never was. I will do, but very briefly.
I thank the member for giving way. I thank the member for giving way, and he's making an excellent and very important speech. On the point about Labour Together, is he aware that most of the supporters, and indeed, as I understand it, the bankrollers of Labour Together, had nothing whatsoever to do with the traditions of the Labour movement? It was merely using a name in order to try and change the nature of the Labour Party away from its traditional socialist objectives.
Well, I have had a debate previously on Labour Together, so I'll leave the comments which my rightful friend has made to stand for themselves. This was a faction which sought to change the Labour Party in something it never was. And if we continue down the path which has been chosen, I fear that we are in a downward spiral from which we will not escape.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I start by reflecting on something I feel, I'm sure many members across the House feel, and what our constituents certainly feel, and that is how utterly depressing it is that we're having to have this debate at all. Just a few years after we went through all this under Boris Johnson and the Conservatives, and less than 2 years after the British people voted them out of office for indulging in this sort of chaos and distraction, here we are again. Vladimir Putin is waging war on our continent. Donald Trump is waging war with Iran. We desperately need to strengthen our own national defences. Families and businesses are struggling against the cost of living crisis. Petrol prices have soared, and people are really worried about what Trump's war will mean for their holidays this summer and their energy and food bills this winter. And our NHS is still in crisis. We all have constituents who are waiting weeks to see a GP, people who are dying on corridors in our hospitals, loved ones who aren't getting the care they need. We should be talking about them today. Theirs are the problem the government should be focused on every single day. This is what they promised after all. In their manifesto, they said that the problems in our country are, and I quote, a direct result of a governing party that time and again puts its own interests above the issues that affect families. They promised to change that, but here we are again. Instead of fixing the NHS and social care, instead of properly funding our defence, instead of cutting prices at the pump, here we are having to ask why the Prime Minister appointed the close friend of a notorious paedophile sex trafficker to one of the most important and sensitive jobs in this government. Peter Mandelson, whose relationship with Jeffrey Epstein had been well reported and highlighted to the Prime Minister, who had already been forced to resign in disgrace twice from the previous Labour governments, and who we now know was deemed a national security risk by the government's vetting agency. And so we do, sadly, have to ask, why did the Prime Minister do this? Why did he appoint Mandelson? Why did he announce the appointment before the national security had been done, despite the then Cabinet Secretary Simon Case having told him that should happen first? And why was he so determined to get Mandelson in post that he created, as Olly Robbins described it this morning, an atmosphere of pressure and a certain dismissiveness about the developed vetting process? A vetting process the Prime Minister had since blamed for his mistakes. And even after all this, even after yesterday's statement, the Prime Minister still hasn't told us why he appointed Mandelson. He admitted that appointing Mandelson was a mistake, and he's apologised for it. He's tried to make the rest about process and officials. But he still hasn't answered the fundamental question, why? But I think we know a big part of the answer, don't we? Donald Trump. This all comes back to the way the Prime Minister decided to approach his relationship with the President when he came back to office last year. Our party urged the Prime Minister to stand up to Trump, to stand together with our allies, to approach him from a position of strength, not weakness. But he chose the opposite course. He decided to try and appease Trump, to flatter Trump, to stroke Trump's ego and hope he'd be nice to us in return. And clearly, he thought Peter Mandelson was the man for that job. So that is it. The decision to try and curry favour with Trump instead of standing up to him. That is the original sin that has landed the Prime Minister and his government in the mess they are in today. And has it worked? Absolutely not.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Yesterday I asked the Prime Minister about Peter Mandelson's security vetting condition and his visiting of previous clients, which required him to be accompanied when he visited previous clients. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that we need to find out whether this lack of having accompaniment to visiting Palantir in Washington with the Prime Minister was a one-off, or simply Mandelson continuing business as usual?
Well, my honourable friend was right to ask that question yesterday, and I thought the Prime Minister's response to him was totally inadequate, that those types of meetings had not been recorded. But if we can go back to President Trump, Mr. Speaker, despite all the flattering, Trump has still caused enormous damage to our economy and to the livelihoods of the British people with his tariffs and his war with Iran. Trump still undermines NATO, makes threats against our country and our allies, and insults Britain's armed forces. And just look at what Trump said last night, that Mandelson was a really bad pick. Now, I won't dwell on the hypocrisy of Trump's words, from a man who was close friends with Epstein, who parted with him, and has so far taken no responsibility for that. From a president who still has, as his Commerce Secretary, a neighbour of Epstein who visited Epstein's island and who lied about his relationship with him. All that is for another debate. But Trump's post, Mr. Speaker, hypocritical as it is, does show the futility of trying to appease him. It shows how pointless it is to make a decision like who to appoint as US ambassador based on what Trump would like most. It doesn't work, it hasn't worked. And I hope that on top of everything else, the Prime Minister and the party opposite will reflect on that point. The approach to Trump has failed. It is time to change course and stand up to him. Stand with our European and Commonwealth allies in defence of our national interest. Yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a mess of the government's own making. A mess born out of a futile attempt to appease Donald Trump. And a mess that just keeps getting worse with today's revelations, uncovered by my honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, that the Prime Minister pushed for the appointment as ambassador of another Labour crony with ties to a sex offender. Catastrophically bad judgments that have created a mess that has distracted and consumed this government and stopped it from focusing on what the British people actually need. Because the people out there don't want more Westminster drama. They're thinking about the hospital appointment that keeps getting pushed back, the mortgage payments that just seem to keep going up, the loved ones who need care but is stuck on a waiting list, the threats to our national security from an ever more dangerous world. Those are the things that keep people up at night, and they deserve a Prime Minister and a government that is focused on them. Our party will never stop making that case. We will never stop holding this government to account, not for the sake of political point scoring, but on behalf of the British people who deserve better than this. Mr. Speaker, the last Conservative government failed our country by getting stuck in a cycle of chaos and scandal and refusing to move on. The question for the Labour Party is whether they will repeat that mistake or finally deliver the change our country needs.
Yeah. Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Member for Kingston and Surbiton. And the point he was making latterly really about the economy and the situation we find ourselves in. I would say the Prime Minister is absolutely focused on that and has been from day one. There are these distractions and it would be great to move on from them, but of course we are entitled to this debate. But I do believe that he wanted to bring order to our trade arrangements, and that was why he was persuaded into appointing Peter Mandelson. And I am not a big fan of Peter Mandelson. I can assure you of that. But what I would say is, just a short year ago, many people in this House were fating him and around the world for the deal that Mandelson managed to strike with the United States. Now, there are many questions about that deal that was struck by Peter Mandelson. But for the purposes of this debate, I just want to come back to some of the points that the Leader of the Opposition made. And I didn't intervene on her because I felt it was absolutely fine for her to continue. But just to pick up on some of the points that she made yesterday, because she amply demonstrated that she was very capable of not prosecuting an argument. She emphasised about process. And there is one thing I would say about this Prime Minister, is that he is absolutely rock solid when it comes to process. You may laugh, but for those of you in this place, those members, Mr. Speaker, who backed Boris Johnson, who accepted his lies in this place, or accepted the word of Liz Truss and that catastrophic kamikaze budget. That would be the question of judgment. On process, this Prime Minister is absolutely rock solid. And a second point I would make about him, Mr. Speaker, is he is a man of utmost decency and would never, ever lie, because he knows that his credibility rests on that. There is a point, I will come in a moment, I am just beginning to make my speech. There is a point here about some sort of conspiracy, some sort of cover-up that is being. And when the Leader of the Opposition speaks of number 10, I think she may be, if I could disabuse of her, the point is between the Prime Minister and the team around him.
Will you give away that point?
And the point is, I will come, there's others I want to allow in. The point is to differentiate between the team around him and the Prime Minister himself. The Prime Minister clearly delegated responsibilities to his Chief of Staff. Now, it may be the case that the Leader of Opposition missed the fact that the Prime Minister sacked that.
Bernard, please, you're in my visual being permanently stood up. He'll give way when he wants to, not because you're stood up, obviously. Not Western.
I will bring in the right honourable gentleman shortly, just to ease your patience, Mr. Speaker. But the point being that when he sacked Morgan McSweeney, he realised that there were problems within his team at number 10. Now, she may claim that somehow number 10 was the leadership, or number 10 was the worst in living memory. Now, the living memory, I'm not sure how far back that goes for her, but as my honourable friend for Normanton and Hemsworth was saying, that we don't have to go back very far, I would say, to 2022 with a certain Liz Truss and her number 10 operation, or that of Boris Johnson and the 3 years we endured of his lying, his pathological lying in this place. But look, the Leader of the Opposition, and I will come to him in just a moment, the Leader of the Opposition was talking about the biggest decision that a Prime Minister can make is about the security of this country. Just a few short weeks ago, she was talking about that the United Kingdom should be drawn into the war in Iran, and it was proven absolutely wrong. I will allow my right honourable friend to come in.
I'm most grateful to the right honourable gentleman, who I know as a friend across this House, and we work together positively on many things. But as I served on the Privileges Committee that studied the Boris case and reached a conclusion upon it, if he wants to help the Prime Minister, I would be rather wary of making parallels between Boris Johnson and the present Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend. I mean, the point I was making was simply to address that from the Leader of the Opposition, who was suggesting the operation at number 10 was the worst in living memory. I think it's quite obvious that that is absolutely not the case. We have just had two very recent examples in 19 to 22 and then in 22-23 under Johnson and Truss. I want to make it quite clear that the way I see the mistake that may have been made by number 10 is the clear delegation, a clear delegation to his Chief of Staff. And that Chief of Staff was at the heart of what I would say is an inner circle within number 10, which no longer exists, of Peter Mandelson, of Morgan McSweeney and Matthew Doyle. And as has come to light just this morning, that Matthew Doyle was also part of that problem.
Honourable gentleman for giving way, and there must be a reshuffle coming, Mr. Speaker, because no one would seriously make a speech like this at such serious times. He says the Prime Minister was a stickler for process, and he has claimed that the Prime Minister has somehow delegated responsibility for the appointment. Therefore, can I ask him, with the box note from the Cabinet Secretary, the Chief Advisor to the Prime Minister and Chief Civil Servant, why he advised, and can the honourable gentleman defend the Prime Minister's decision not to follow that advice if he was making the decisions?
This is, look, I am not very close to these operations. I've never been a minister, but that is the honest truth. I have never been a minister, and to answer his point, I do not wish to be a minister either. But I am not close enough to that, so I cannot answer that honestly. But what I can say is what I heard from Sir Olly Robbins this morning, about how he was lent on and also what documents he may have had access to, and also the vetting report. But look, what I would say, what we've heard today is that the Chief of Staff lent on the Foreign Office, whether it was on Matthew Doyle or whether it was the appointment of Peter Mandelson. And that is the issue. What I would say is the Prime Minister, in my experience of having known him since 2017, is that he is absolutely straight as a die. He may have accepted the advice, and maybe that advice has now proven to be wrong. But, you know, he's been let down by those around him. He made a mistake. He understands and he's accepted that.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. And the court case goes quiet. Those are the immortal words in the famous film A Few Good Men. That's the realisation in that court case that things have moved from process to accountability and responsibility. If you haven't seen the film, it's about two Marines who are on trial for killing another. But the real story that unravels is whether command can deny any responsibility of the actions that it set in motion. Here lies the parallel. When subordinates act on the understood direction of authority, where does responsibility ultimately sit? They acted because of you. It belongs to you. Let's recount the facts that we do, though, that aren't disputed in this House. Lord Mandelson was announced as the Prime Minister to be the US ambassador from the UK in December 24. UK security vetting recommended against developed vetting clearance in January 2025. The FCDO overruled that recommendation, enabling the appointment, and the Prime Minister stated publicly due process had been followed. Sir Olly Robbins, then Permanent Secretary, was later dismissed. But what Robbins told us in the committee in November 2025 is telling. Quote, "By the time we are describing, it was clear the Prime Minister wanted to make his appointment himself. Therefore, I understand the FCDO was informed of his decision, acted on it, and via the Foreign Secretary sought and obtained the King's approval for the appointment. In this case, as Chris explained, the Prime Minister took advice and formed a view himself, and we then acted on that view." The FCDO is clear. This wasn't drift. It was acting under direction. The Prime Minister formed that view. They acted on it. Acting on instruction, acting on direction, acting on what the Prime Minister wanted. Yet, since then, the Prime Minister's been trying to separate the decision and the consequence. There's the decision, there are the consequences, but we and this public know you can't separate the two. If an official acts in the shadow of a settled view, responsibility returns to that source where the shadow was first cast. And let's draw some more comparisons in the film, because it's quite telling. Colonel Jessup does not issue the written order. Prime Minister does not personally do the vetting. Subordinates act on a clear command and intent. The FCDO acted on the political intent. The defence by the Colonel was, "I didn't order that." The defence by the Prime Minister was, "I wasn't told." The court finds, though, that authority can't be passive. We in this House say neither can the Prime Minister be. The blame lands on the subordinates, and the same again has happened here. In both cases, the controversy is not on the mechanics, but where the moral and constitutional responsibility resides. Officials were acting on a settled prime ministerial preference. The Prime Minister can't have it both ways. He can't have decisive authority on the way in and plausible deniability on the way out. That's not process, that's power without accountability. If the decision was his, Isn't the responsibility his? And if not, why not? And whose is it then? I will give way.
This is probably a useful speech to intervene on due to my striking resemblance to Tom Cruise. But the key point in that scenario was about responsibility. And I think members opposite are probably lucky that Sadiq Khan has cancelled all the tubes today, otherwise there may be another transport mechanism they may be under. But does this not show wider that the Prime Minister is failing in his key role, which is to take responsibility for the decisions he's charged to take?
He's absolutely right, Mr. Speaker, and the bottom line, it really is here. The Prime Minister has shaped the system by having a settled political decision, one that's had horrific consequences, despite all the warnings that we've talked about in this House about Mandelson being fired twice and etc. And is now trying to point to the process as the failings, but the country isn't buying it. The film teaches us this simple lesson: power cannot hide behind those who obey it. And just before I finish, I have a message for the Labour MPs and would like to address them directly. And to paraphrase directly from that famous speech from Colonel Jessup, he says, "The PM neither has the time nor inclination to explain himself to backbenchers who rise and sleep under the blanket of the very majority that he provides, and then questions the manner in which the PM provides it. The PM would rather you say just thank you and went on your way. Otherwise, he suggests you pick up a weapon and stand a post. Either way, he doesn't give a damn about what you're entitled to."
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
Following the revelations at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee today by Oliver Robbins, who said how the Prime Minister had pushed for Peter Mandelson to be appointed and also was pushing for his former Director of Communications, Matthew Doyle, to be appointed as well, unqualified for the post. Would my honourable friend agree these are not the actions of a Prime Minister concerned about the national interest, rather his personal interest? Nor is it the actions of Prime Minister concerned about national security, merely his job security, particularly pushing for Peter Mandelson, who is a known national security risk.
The member's very senior makes an absolute erudite point. The question is, we still don't know why the Prime Minister chose Mandelson. He's never said exactly the reasons why he did. We can all see the reasons why he shouldn't have done. But I will table.
Can I just ask my honourable friend that there surely can be no situation that he thinks where officials do not flag concerns with ministers or prime ministers, because fundamentally it is them that are accountable to this House and the British public, and what we are talking about is accountability here.
Accountability starts from the top. Absolutely. We've heard in the FCDO today, the message from number 10 was, get this effing done. That was the political directive, and everything else follows suit. And that's exactly what Olly Robbins has said. And here is where I conclude, Mr. Speaker, because this side of the House knows the truth. The public want the truth. The only question that remains is, can the Labour benchers, the backbenchers, handle the truth? Because surely if they can't, they must do something about it.
Just help the House with how many people got an informal time limit, 7 minutes, and the good example to set that record is Caroline Harris.
I will be very, very brief, as I'm not attempting to audition for a BAFTA, unlike some of my colleagues. And neither am I trying to attempt any factional point scoring, as some colleagues have stated today. The Prime Minister himself said yesterday Peter Mandelson should never have been appointed as our ambassador to the US. So I'm going to be very simple on this one, so can the Chief Secretary tell the House how the Prime Minister has changed the way due diligence and security vetting is conducted before appointments are announced in the future? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Sir David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our ambassador in Washington stands at the nexus of the Five Eyes. with more classified intelligence crossing his desk than cross the desks of most cabinet ministers. It's obviously one of the most important appointments the Prime Minister makes, but it's also one of the most sensitive. A security failure in the post could seriously jeopardise the Five Eyes relationship. The Americans are notoriously twitchy about security. So the appointee's conduct before the appointment must be beyond reproach, and their trustworthiness must be impeccable. Now we had one of our best ambassadors, Karen Pierce, was already in place. She was highly regarded by the State Department and the White House, and contrary to what the Lib Dem leader said, so much so that President Trump called the Prime Minister, urged him to keep Pierce, while expressing concern about Mandelson. One of 3 calls from the White House on her behalf and against him. She was a high-class, high-performance, zero-risk choice. Against that, we had the London establishment view that somehow Mandelson's amoral dark arts would make him a good ambassador, typically espoused by people with no idea what makes a good ambassador. And one of the questions before us in assessing the Prime Minister's judgment is whether Mandelson was a better appointment than Karen Pierce, and if so, was the benefit of that appointment sufficient to outweigh the clear risks of that appointment? And of course the answer to both of those questions is an emphatic no. It was abundantly clear to anyone taking a decision that he was a significant security risk. A man who'd twice been forced to resign from government, with known links to a paedophile, closely associated with Russian oligarch Deripaska, a man who'd been responsible for the deaths of 100 people, personally responsible for murders and extortion, and with whom Mr. Mandelson, or Lord Mandelson as he was then, spent weekends in his Dhaka and in Moscow. Weekends, of course, because the EU doesn't record where you are for the weekend as a commissioner. That's the sort of background we're talking about. And as we heard from my right honourable friend, the leader of my party, he was also non-executive director of Sistema, a Russian arms dealing company led by a Putin ally. And Mandelson's role at Sistema, when he stood down, he then took a large shareholding, which he kept for some time as well. All of this is in the public domain, and was in the public domain before he was appointed. China too, I can list them over and over again. TikTok, owned by the Chinese state. Shine, based on Uyghur forced labour. And of course, he always calls time and time again for, at the time, he called it time and time again for closer Anglo-Chinese relationships. Now, when you make appointments like this, it's not an appointment, and not a judgment beyond reasonable doubt. It's not even a judgment on the balance of probabilities. It's a judgment on significant risk. Are you going to take a significant risk with a Five Eyes relationship? Of course you're not. Then it should be clear on public data alone that this man is a significant, or was a significant risk. And indeed, the proprieties and ethics team in the Cabinet Office flagged most of the issues I've just described to Number 10 before this process started. And we should remember, and Mr. Speaker, forgive me for being so direct, but Peter Mandelson is a man who has proven he's greedy for money, greedy for glamour, greedy for status, greedy for power, and willing to break the rules to get them. That's the key point, willing to break the rules to get them. Such a man is a classic security risk in the face of Russian or Chinese compromise. That's not to mention the risk posed by, of course, his known involvement with Epstein. Number 10 chose... I'll give way very quickly, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank him for giving way. I have to say, I'm not in the Peter Mandelson fan club. I'm old enough to remember his first life in this government. But this morning we heard that the UK VS judged them to be a borderline risk, and we heard how officials thought that that risk could be managed. This is quite different from what you're outlining, of what the honourable gentleman's outlining.
Is the public information. If he wants to get into the argument on UKVS between UKVS, who we're now told was a marginal, and Number 10, who says it's a red, the strike-off, he can argue between them. I'm talking about public data. What you should know before you start this process. And Number 10, no, he's had his go. Sit down. Number 10 has chosen to ignore these things. And that's critical. Chosen. Because we've heard already about the pressure put on the Foreign Office over and over again. And forgive me again, Mr. Speaker, but for the direct quote, because it's obscene, but the chairman actually recounted how Morgan McSweeney called Sir Olly's predecessor and told him, quotes, just fucking approve it. Now, speaking of the committee, he made clear he was under constant pressure and there was an atmosphere of constant chasing. Why? Well, we already know it's not because Mandelson was materially better candidate than Karen Pierce, the brilliant, well-established, highly regarded incumbent with excellent connections to the White House. It was because Mandelson was a leading member of the new Labour aristocracy. Full stop. Not talent, connection. It wasn't even, I mean, it was not in the national interest, plainly, it wasn't even in the Labour interest. It was in the interest of a Labour clique. Now, Mandel's appointment was a decision in complete disregard of the risks, known risks, which explains the Prime Minister's lack of curiosity about the vetting. It wasn't lack of curiosity. He did not ask because he did not want to know. The former Cabinet Secretary warned the Prime Minister he should secure Mandelson's security clearance before the appointment. He was warned on the 11th of December by the Cabinet Office about his past, his public past. And on the 11th of September last year, Number 10 was asked by a journalist whether Mandelson had failed to develop vetting. Number 10 knew. It's as plain as a pikestone. So, where do we go from here? We have a Prime Minister and a government in power who are making decisions in the interests of their own clique within their own party. And they're making their interests at the explicit risk of the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister should resign.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Peter Mandelson once spoke of the Labour left being sealed in a tomb. Today, it is the toxic politics he came to represent that should be buried. Politics that repels millions and drifts far from the values on which our party was founded. If we are serious about renewal, serious about learning the lessons of this troubling episode, then we must confront that culture, what enabled it. That means looking at figures such as the Prime Minister's former Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, a protégé of Mandelson's, and of the network of influence around him. Mandelson's appointment did not happen in isolation, as we learned today. It reflects a wider direction under the Prime Minister, where those behind the Labour Together project wielded significant influence in developing this toxic culture, which has been allowed to take hold of Number 10 in the governing of our country. It points to a political culture that lacks candour, exists to promote wealth and power, and ignores all else in pursuit of this. It's a culture where proximity to power outweighs principle, where access counts far more than accountability, and where the suffering of victims is overshadowed by connections. When decisions are driven by patronage and power is concentrated in a narrow circle, it is not only our internal party democracy that suffers, but the integrity of our public institutions and our country. And too often, it is our civil servants, those who serve with professionalism and integrity, who are left to carry the consequences. I want to commend Sir Olly Robbins for giving evidence today. His professionalism and dedication after a week where he has been very publicly hounded by some in governments was commendable. And it was good to see his trade union back them steadfastly at the committee today. Robbins will be a loss to the FCDO and the country, all brought about by a series of catastrophic political decisions by Number 10. That is not right, not fair, and it's not what the public expects of elected officials. And because of this, the public will rightly demand accountability and cultural change. This must begin with a thorough review of the political operation which brought the Prime Minister to power and which clearly continues to carry undue influence over this government. So I once again, as I have asked on multiple occasions, now in both letters to the Prime Minister and speeches in this place, call for a full, transparent and independent investigation into the activities and practices of Labour Together, both prior to and after the election of this government. Only then will we fully understand how this exclusive political network has been able to undermine our democracy and institutions right at the heart of government.
Speaker, Like many, I spent the weekend door-knocking in my constituency. People in Bicester and Woodstock are frustrated by delays to medical appointments, fed up with rising prices, and fearful about the war in the Middle East. Yet a number of them raised the Prime Minister's handling of the Peter Mandelson saga. Their overwhelming emotion was disappointment that a Prime Minister who promised change has delivered so little, and anger that a Prime Minister who said he would be better than the Tories had failed so badly. The Prime Minister set out yesterday to defend himself. Mr. Speaker, he set out that case like a barrister. He took the narrow view that the charge was misleading the House, and he tried to claim that Sir Olly Robbins had repeatedly misled him, and so it was only natural that he should have misled us. He failed first by misjudging the seriousness of his failure. It was as though he was charged with petty larceny when the actual offence was gross misconduct decapitation. Yet the crucial weakness in his argument was one of chronology. He cited statements and reports between September 2025 and April 2026, but the crime he sought to defend was committed between December 2024 and January 2025. He had no answer to why he ignored the advice of the Cabinet Secretary to seek security clearance before appointing Mandelson. He could not explain why he announced Mandelson's appointment without conditions, nor why the offer letter to Mandelson, dated before Sir Olly started work, said that Mandelson had cleared security clearance. Mr. Speaker, the damning evidence given today by Sir Olly Robbins confirms what the Prime Minister failed to dispel yesterday. There was a complacent culture in Downing Street, indeed there may still be, which had a dismissive approach to vetting Lord Mandelson. The Prime Minister wants us now to believe he would have sacked Mandelson if he had failed vetting. Yet all the evidence then is that he and his team did not care about vetting and even believed it had already been granted. We further learnt this morning that officials in Number 10 asked the FCDO to find an ambassadorial role for Matthew Doyle, another man who was friends with a convicted sex offender. What is worse, they told FCDO officials not to tell the Foreign Secretary. The unavoidable conclusion is that under the Prime Minister and Morgan McSweeney, Number 10 believed it could fix plum jobs for the boys, and they were all boys, Mr. Speaker, with casual disregard for process, propriety or national security. So we come to the consequences of this sorry episode. First, a distinguished civil servant has lost his position as the fall guy for the Prime Minister. I was proud to work with Sir Olly, and I know the regard held for him by ministers and civil servants. So I am frankly furious, to use a word of the day, to learn that a Number 10 spokesman has just said that Sir Olly was, and I quote, a man of integrity and professionalism who made an error of judgment. Mr. Speaker, it is extraordinary that when political appointees like Peter Mandelson or the former Deputy Prime Minister are accused of errors of judgment or worse, the Prime Minister has come to that dispatch box and defended them for days. Yet when the Prime Minister's error of judgment was highlighted again, he took a few short hours to dismiss Sir Olly. In the last 5 days, the Prime Minister has gone further and directed the full power of the state against one man. The Government Legal Service reinterpreted the Cragg Act on Sunday. The Government Communications Service briefed hard against Robbins. And Cabinet Office officials sought to prime the Foreign Affairs Committee before it heard from Sir Olly today. This state-led assault on one man is unprecedented and it is unacceptable. If the point of committing an error of judgment is to resign, why is the Prime Minister still in post? Second, this whole episode has done grave damage to relations between ministers and civil servants. The Prime Minister once said, and I quote, "When staff make mistakes, I carry the can. I never turn on my staff." No one believes that now. His cowardly reaction has shown civil servants that they should be fearful of future treatment by the Prime Minister, Number 10 and ministers. As a former Permanent Secretary, I believed that the Prime Minister understood and valued the relationship between trust, candour and loyalty that governs the best relationship in ministries. Today, those relationships are shattered and our country will be the poorer for it. And so thirdly, Mr. Speaker, my constituents and people up and down the country worried about waiting lists, rising prices and threats to security, can have no confidence that this Prime Minister can change our country for the better. When something went wrong in government, the Prime Minister did not take responsibility, he took the easy way out. When called on to defend himself, he failed abjectly. This sorry tale points to a corrupted culture at the heart of Number 10, and there is now only one man left to carry the can. He must complete the clear-out and resign.
Alice Badge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I came this morning from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, where we had the opportunity to speak to Sir Olly Robbins as our witness. So I wanted to use this debate to pull out some of the pertinent points that we heard there, which I think are relevant. But before I start, I absolutely agree with members across the House that are saying that Lord Mandelson was a completely inappropriate and terrible choice for our ambassador. And there has clearly been a failure in the process that ended up with his appointment and vetting. But it's important that we look at what Sir Olly said in the witness statement today, because some of that contradicts what has been said through some of the statements in the House. The first thing that Sir Olly said, which I think was important, is that he said to the committee this morning that no ministers, not the Prime Minister, not the Foreign Secretary, nor any other minister or official in Number 10 was given any sight that UKSV had declined Mandelson's security vetting. They had no sight at all of any details of that vetting. And he said that, and he justified that, and he defended that, because no officials and no ministers should have sight of that vetting, because it is extremely personal and sensitive information. I mean, I'm someone that's gone through that process myself when I was working at the Foreign Office. What you do not want to create is any sort of conditions where people are afraid of sharing sensitive information in a vetting process that some period in the future might be leaked, and whether that's to politicians, whether that's to other people in your line management chain, or as we've seen later on, it's been leaked to the press, because that undermines the integrity of the process as a whole. So I think that, firstly, that reinforces what the Prime Minister said yesterday. The second thing he said, Sir Olly, was he disputed the characterisation that UKSV had failed that Peter Mandelson's vetting, that it was some way a binary choice inside the Foreign Office. It's important that we explain, or I try and justify what Sir Olly was saying, because the FCDO, they do have a slightly different process to other parts of government, and that is because, as an overseas department, a bit like the MOD and other places, there are people that come into those roles with seriously long careers and all sorts of different interests. And I'm not suggesting that Peter Mandelson should have passed the vetting, not at all. But the fact that a borderline case was coming to FCDO and the FCDO was making that decision rather than UKSV was not unusual. That was quite a normal process to happen, according to Sir Olly's evidence. And it's the sort of thing that is important that we hold in the future. And I think it's important for us to say that as well. And thirdly, I think that is really important is not only did... Please, I'll give way.
I'm really surprised that he's swallowing this guff about it being a borderline case. It was quite clear that security vetting put this in the red box, which meant fail. Sir Olly is being lauded to the skies now because he's the victim of ruthless prime ministerial politics. But he also has an angle on this, and the angle is that he, shall we say, massaged his own judgment because he knew the pressure that was on him from the government. There was nothing borderline about this. The only reason he's saying it was borderline was because he needs an excuse for having overridden it when he shouldn't have done.
Yes. Please speak to what the witness told us in the inquiry this morning, and he was very clear, and many members made the same case that you're making now. That it was a red box, as we've seen in that evidence that was submitted. But he was very clear that it was borderline. This was very usual for the Foreign Office to conduct these types of cases. And I think you can make your own mind about whether you believe him or believe other people. Please.
What he actually said, I came in to watch, what he actually said was the advice he was given by his Director of Intelligence, I think, was borderline. One of the issues which were not clear was that whether the pressure from Number 10 was simply on him or on all members of the channel, if you like, down to lower levels.
Yes, I had a different interpretation So Sir Olly also said, and you can look back at the transcript, that yes, there was pressure from number 10 to get the appointment done quickly. It could be interpreted that they wanted to get that appointment done before the inauguration of President Trump. There was an important timeline that needed to be done by, because there was a risk that any new ambassadorial appointments after that might be interfered. Again, this was the words of Sir Olly. I'm not bringing this up from nowhere. And let me finish. The other important point: it wasn't just the UK security vetting system that put a borderline process through, and then the FCDO approved it. It was also the intelligence agencies. So I think it's equally concerning that Peter Mandelson was given strap clearance. And I asked Sir Olly directly, were there any concerns raised by the intelligence agencies on the process of obtaining strap clearance, which is a higher level of security, which allows him to have access to the highest, most classified secrets that the country has. And there was no one from the intelligence agencies that raised any concerns during that strap process either. So I think these are serious concerns in the process. Yes,
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I gently say to him and to others who seek to make this argument he's pursuing, at the heart of this is a toxic and dismissive culture at number 10. That's a point we can not get away from. That dismissiveness has led us to this place. This is not a small administration breach, it's a matter of national security. The British public is not buying it. Surely we should be saying there needs to be a full, transparent, independent inquiry into this whole situation to uncover the truth. That's what the British public want, with consequences for including the Prime Minister.
That is not my experience of number 10, and I am pleased to see that there is a review looking at the vetting system, because I think there are serious problems with the vetting system that this process has uncovered. Indeed, I mean, my takeaways from the evidence that I heard this morning are a number of them. I agree with members that Peter Mandelson was a terrible pick for our ambassador. Even without knowing the things that came out later, I think it was the wrong decision that he should have been picked. But also, there has clearly been failures in the vetting process, both with the DV vetting, both with the process of the FCDO and with the process of the strap vetting. So I'm pleased that the government has announced 2 reviews, one to be led by Sir Adrian Fulford and a separate Cabinet Office review to look at those vetting processes and ensure that both for Peter Mandelson's vetting and for the UK vetting system more generally, that such mistakes do not happen again. I'm slightly concerned that in the short term, the government has suspended the ability of overseas departments to operate their discretion in granting developed vetting. I know that that's a sensible response in the short term, but I hope as the reviews go through, that the Minister will consider the reasons why these departments have that discretion in the future.
I thank him for giving way, and I'm very grateful for him to do so, and I've listened quite carefully to his speech. Given what he heard at the committee this morning and his background and experience, does he regret Olly Robbins' sacking?
I feel very sympathetic to Olly Robbins. Olly Robbins will have an opportunity to account for Sir Olly Robbins, will have an opportunity to account for himself, but he gave a very good account of himself at the committee this morning, and it's not for me to make that judgment. I can think of several good reasons why the FCDO and the MOD might need to use that discretion in the future. I'm also really concerned that details about Peter Mandelson's vetting were leaked to the press in September. Even considering Peter Mandelson's misconduct, the integrity of that process is really important, and Sir Olly also raised concerns about this issue. So I hope that the reviews that the Minister announced the other day will also look at the leaks to the press, because it is really unacceptable that such vital personal information about the vetting process has been released in that way. But most importantly, I think Sir Olly's evidence, it rubbishes some of the accusations that members yesterday were making in the House and indeed in the media, that were questioning the Prime Minister's honesty about the situation, because he did categorically rule out any suggestion that the Prime Minister knew anything about that, for good reason. So I think those members that made those accusations and that were rightly thrown out of the House, they should come forward and correct the record and apologise on that point. I will take one more intervention and then I'll finish up.
But does he surely realise that to those of us...
Did say 7 minutes, I think you know on 10. Don't worry, let's have a Roberts.
Does he surely raise to people outside that this argument, these fine details over process, it morphs into a defence of ignorance, and then it morphs into a defence of incompetency, and that actually is doing the Prime Minister as much harm as all these arguments about his honesty?
So I think we've heard real concerns about the process here, and I'm glad that the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister has announced reviews into that process, because we really need to make sure we get it right in the future. Thank you.
Bradley